Neil's a mechanical engineer by background. I'm not sure if that's really impressed you yet. So Neil's specialism is human factors, and he set up his own internationally acclaimed company, IHF, Integrated Human Factors, a few years ago. So now you're probably more impressed. Yeah? Well, Neil is also a former fighter pilot. So now you're really impressed. And as well as traveling at dizzy speeds in an RAF jet, he's a downhill skier, he's a whitewater rafter, he's been a professional rugby player. And rather topically, we've been expecting you, Mr. Clark. So let me hand over to Neil.
Doug, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you to everyone for your time this morning. And yeah, thank you to Mark and Alan and everybody at SDC for inviting me along to present today. I've got a presentation here which I'm looking forward to sharing with you in relation to human factors, of course. And my brief was to talk about risk in human factors and to talk a little bit about how potentially we could look at getting our strategies right within this space. And so I thought the best way to do that would be just to talk a little bit about my personal experiences, talk a little bit about why human factors is so important to me, try and get a handle on just how valuable the potential of human factors has, not just in safety but in productivity and across the board within your organisations, and then lay out some really simple steps that I think could support everybody, regardless of what sector they're in terms of taking a proactive approach to including human factors within their organisation. So that's what I'd like to do today, and I'd be very happy to take some questions at the end of the session. Before I go into that, I spent, as Doug kindly introduced, I spent 10 years in the Air Force, all of which luckily was flying. And the last 3 years I spent was working with the Commonwealth of Australia, running their flight test programme for a new air-to-air refuelling system. And the new air-to-air refuelling system was a converted Airbus A330, which basically had all the seats taken out of it, and we replaced the seats with fuel tanks and fuel bladders that then allowed F-18s and F-16s to come in and refuel from this aircraft. It was a $2.2 billion programme, and Airbus military were involved, the Commonwealth of Australia was involved, and you had all of the big consultancies that you would expect to see in such a programme, including the US Air Force, who were providing particular information on various different systems within the aircraft. And it never ceased to amaze me just how technologically advanced this project was. We were converting an A330, which was at the time one of the latest evolutions of the Airbus fleet. We had 3D modelling systems. We had virtual reality systems that allowed the air-to-air refuelling officer the opportunity to really visualise in 3D where these bugs, the F-16s, the F-18s, were in 3D space, and where they were in relation to this Airbus A330, and how they could best pull them in, how they could best look after them, how they could best calculate how much fuel they needed delivered to them, and the best way in which to deliver that. The point I'm trying to make is that it was such a technologically advanced programme, we thought naively that nothing really could go wrong. And the setup of the cockpit was really quite interesting. It had the captain on the left-hand seat, it had the first officer on the right-hand seat, and then facing to the rear of the aircraft was the air-to-air refuelling officer. And he was the guy that was responsible for deploying that great big shuttlecock that you see on the back of these, we've seen them in the movies. Or they had a big kind of lever that folded down from the aircraft, extended and then plugged into the back of some particular types of aircraft. And I remember in one flight test, the air-to-air refuelling officer was conveying instructions to the F-16 pilot, and every time he said right 3 units, left 2 units, up 2 units, down 2 units, the complete opposite seems to be happening in the fact that the pilot in the fast jet was getting further and further away. And we thought, how on earth can this be happening? We've got 3D modelling systems, we've got state-of-the-art infrared systems, we know exactly who the aircraft is, we know exactly what type of fuel the guy needs and how much of it. And yet, with the simple instructions, he seems to be getting further away, not closer. And despite all of this technology, and despite all of this design and experience around the table, what we hadn't factored into the discussion was the fact that the air-to-air fueling officer was facing in the opposite direction from everybody else that was involved in the system. And therefore, when he said left, actually that translated into right. And when he said right, actually that translated into left. And so a very simple oversight in terms of understanding the human contribution within an incredibly technical system had the polar opposite effect of what we had hoped. And in the short term, our suggestion and our fix was we gave the air-to-air fueling officer white gloves, and on the left-hand glove he wrote right, and on the right-hand glove he wrote left. And so when he was given instructions to these multi-million dollar jets that were getting fuel from, he had to pause, look down to his left hand, and remind himself actually he meant right. And the point I'm trying to make is, it kind of gives me goosebumps when I tell that story. And the point I'm trying to make, and the reason that you've got a rotating coin on your screen at the moment, is that for every system that we will come into contact with, there's a technical side and there's a non-technical side. And I sometimes think that we still need to wave the flag to say, regardless of how technologically advanced your technical side is, regardless of how reliable it is, and regardless of how sexy you think it may be, if it involves a person in any way, shape or form, we shouldn't underestimate just how important that human in the loop is. And therefore, we need to consider constantly, and more than we are currently doing, in my opinion, the other side of that same coin, which is the non-technical or the human factors aspect. Because only when you get the two sides of the same coin working in harmony do you get the true output of your safety, productivity, efficiency, and purpose of your system. And so we had lots and lots of discussions. We were based in Madrid, we flew to Australia frequently, and we came up with this coin, we coined the term, excuse the pun, to say that there was a world of a difference between something that was technically accurate and something that was fit for purpose. And the difference is the person. It's the person, the most valuable yet the most vulnerable person or component of our system, that brings this whole thing to life. And there is no doubt that human factors are starting to gain lots and lots of traction, and that is brilliant to see. But we need to be cognizant of the fact that regardless of how sexy our technology is, we still really need to focus on the human in the loop. And that's what I want to focus on today. So why is HF so important to me? Well, you can talk about the business benefits, you can talk about the benefits to your operation, you can talk about happier workforces because systems are designed round about them, you can talk about retention and recruitment rates, and you can talk about improved human performance contributing to overall system performance and therefore an overall better output. But what really makes human factors sing for me is the fact that when I was in the Air Force, these guys all lost their lives as a result of some sort of human factors failing. They were all involved in aircraft crashes that didn't involve any technical failure of any stretch. And I don't show this slide to drive an emotional anchor into the discussion, or to get my little violin out to say I lost some close friends in my time in the services. Some would say that that's to be expected. But what really resonates with me is that the individual on the right, Mr. Garnon's, landed a helicopter on top of another helicopter, both two perfectly serviceable aircraft. The three gents on the top right-hand side collided in a mid-air collision, misinterpreting where they were within time and space. And poor Kenny flew his jet into the rest and be thankful when he departed from Lookers, never to return again because he became overwhelmed with the situation he found himself in. The point I'm trying to make is that it is incredibly rare nowadays, in my opinion, to see failures that result entirely, or even in the majority of the case due to some sort of system or mechanical or technical failure. And that's what really keeps me at the spring in my step and keeps me focused on what we're trying to do here, which is if we support the human in the loop and we support and are constantly cognizant of the human contribution, then we can genuinely make a difference to how our systems perform, not just in a safety perspective, but from a productivity and efficiency perspective here. And just to draw some parallels, I just wanted to give you a kind of size or feel for the size of the opportunities that potentially sit before us. You know, and these are broad brush figures, but I think they're right in the grand scheme of things. So if we look at our two-sided coin, we've got technical and non-technical. I would argue that at the most 1% of our failures come from the technical side of things. Yet that attracts probably 99% of the investment. And as I said before, don't hang me out to dry on these figures. These figures are designed to create a conversation and create hopefully some critical thinking in your own mind as to where you think the organisational spend might exist within your business. But I think it's fair to say that 1% of our failures at most comes from the technical side, and that attracts probably 99% of the investment. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't invest in our technical systems, you know, evolution of capability, complexity, reliability, and the steps that we're taking into automated systems, semi-automated systems is fantastic. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, wonderful. But we're still not in a place where all of that sexy technology can take the place of the human. And therefore, if we were to go with the HSE's guidance and say that 80% of failures at least are due to some sort of human failure or human error in some way, shape or form, and that probably that attracts 1% of investment, then we can probably see that actually we don't have to take too much of a step into the non-technical world to get a huge gain in the overall system performance. And that's really the parallels that I'm trying to draw out here. So how big is your human factors opportunity? Well, Doug mentioned that I was in the Air Force for the period of time. I'm now lucky enough to be the principal human factors expert on the Typhoon jet for the MOD. And the way that we manage the human factors aspect of it, we call them ASI, Aircrew System Integration aspects of many air vehicles, is to understand the quantitative level of the risk. And we do that through fault sheets. And again, please don't hang me out to dry on the numbers here. The numbers are here are just to articulate the point that I'm trying to make, which is if we were to take a fault sheet analysis into a kind of common everyday occurrence, which would be sliding into the car in front of you, there would be a variety of ways in which that could happen, but I've gone for a couple of ways which I hope to unfold to you in the next few slides. So if we go for a situation whereby there's a combined effect of the car in front's brake lights don't function and that actually us driving the vehicle in behind that car don't recognise that for whatever reason, and there's a combined effect of some sort of technical failure and some sort of human failure that contribute to a little bump on the road, then this is potentially how it could unfold. So what you're about to see is an unfolding story whereby we've assigned some probabilities to what the failure rates could be. So let's just say that you've got 0.019 of a chance of your brake light bulb blowing. Actually, I think the technical failure should probably be a lot less. And you've maybe got a 0.017 chance of the fuse blowing. But the fact of the matter is, if either of those things happen, then the brake light in the car in front would fail. So your brake light's not going to go off if your bulbs go or if your fuse goes. And then if we look at us in our vehicle, there's a number of ways in which our vehicle could fail. So the calipers on our brake disc could fail. The water, there could be water or air or some sort of issue within the brake lines. There could be a leak in the brake line, so it reduces the pressure and it doesn't allow us to do anything with the brakes. The brake pads could fail, the brake pedal could break, and we've assigned probabilities of all these types of mechanical failure to the chances of that happening. Again, we only need one of these things to happen, so they would go in through an OR gate, but they would fundamentally result in a mechanical failure of the car being driven. And so we would need, in this case, potentially, we would need the brake lights in the car in front to fail, and/or a mechanical failure in our car to fail for us to slide into the back of a car due to mechanical failure. And you know, you could pick holes in this all day long, and you know, given if this was a proper study, we'd go into much more detail. But you can see the point that I'm trying to make. And due to the mechanical failure, you've probably got a 3.4 times 10 to the minus 4 chance of that failing. So pretty remote, really. And as I said, I've been really I've been really hard actually on the failure types of these mechanical parts. But for argument's sake, we've got a 3.4 times 10 to the minus 4 chance of a bump happening as a result of a couple of mechanical failures or technical failures in the cars involved. If we look at the human element side of these things, and typically this is how these fault trees unfold. So you've got the technical side, technical aspect on the left-hand side, the human element on the right-hand side. We could look at various different failures, and we use the HART methodology, so human error analysis and reduction technique. And so you could, as the driver of the vehicle behind, you could have a failure to notice that the brake lights on the car in front, so the lights come on but you don't notice them. A failure to notice that the car in front is slowing down. And you could also have that coupled with driver distraction. So all of those things could result in you not noticing the car in front stopping, and that would be a 0.46 chance probability. You could also recognise the fact, and these are things that we do in the aviation world all the time, we kind of go in cycles. So if something mechanical goes wrong, then we've got the probability of that, and then we look to the user or the operator. So what are the chains of events that we would need the operator to do to recover from that situation? Well, first and foremost, we would need to recognise that there has been a failure. They would then have to do something about that, and then there's a risk associated with them not doing that, and then there's a risk associated with them not noticing they've not done that. And all these things can get into pretty good levels of detail. But for the purpose of this, we're going to keep it nice and simple. So we could notice that the car in front is slowing down, and we could have a failure to apply the brakes. We could not apply the brakes properly, and we could press the accelerator rather than the brake, which is called right action, wrong object failure. And either or these things would result in us effectively failing to the car in front stopping, and so we've got a 10% chance of that happening. So again, don't hang out to dry with it. The numbers are in orders of magnitude only. But if either of those things happen, then we've got a 0.05% chance of us not stopping or failure to perform an emergency stop. So really what I'm trying to illustrate here is there's two reasons or two streams of thought that could result in us not performing an emergency stop. The mechanical piece and the human element, if you like. Now, the point that I'm really trying to make on this slide is look at the orders of magnitude of the top probabilities. We've got a 5% chance of not doing it properly from a human perspective, and we've got two orders of magnitude less likely for the failure type to happen on a technical sense. And that is a really generous situation. The point I'm trying to make here is that we're 2 orders of magnitude more likely to have a interruption in our system or failure in a system in this simple case as a result of the person rather than the technology. And just by way of comparison, when we look at these things in the flight test world, often the top level hazard for the mechanical piece is in the region of 10 to the minus 9 or 10 to the minus 12. That's how reliable these systems are. But the systems need the people to operate them. And often when we see the human error come to the top level, it's 10 to the minus 3. So we're 6 to 9 times the order of magnitude more likely to have an incident as a result of the individual, highly trained, highly competent, very experienced operators of this equipment, that they are significantly more likely to introduce an error into the system. And that's really the point I wanted to make. We've got all these super sexy systems, really capable, really reliable, really capable in terms of what they're able to do, but they require the person to operate them. and the orders of magnitude of the likelihood of a failure type or a failure creeping in is significantly weighted towards the individual. So where do we start? Well, it sounds like it's a massive elephant to eat, but actually we start from big to small, and it's really important that we ask ourselves the simple questions. So we don't want to try and boil the ocean. We want to go from big to small, and that often results in some sort of screening process. So how do we look at an organisation and understand where our risk lies in relation to the people? We certainly don't need to do quantitative analysis, although we do that in high reliability systems, and really the only reason I showed you that graph before was just to show you the size of the opportunity. And if we offset that against about where the investment is attracted, there's a massive opportunity for improvement here. So we need to sit back and we need to consider such things as, where does the activities that the people do in our sites align with the consequences that we could potentially realise? And lots of organisations will understand what the really bad day at the office would look like. So we have to have simple conversations that allow us to join the dots of, well, what are the really bad things that we're worried about? How are people involved? And what can we do about it? What activities are taking place in that kind of chain of events? We can do things such as human hands-offs. We can look at recent incidents. And I'll come on to this in a few slides, but incidents are a really good way, as you know, if we properly evaluate the human contribution, to pinpoint not just where the failure occurs, but where the origins of that failure occurs and what we can do about it. And we can use screening tools. So there's lots of screening tools advocated by the HSE, the Energy Institute, which ask simple questions, such as, what's the worst thing that could happen? What's the complexity like involved in this activity? What's the likelihood of human error? Are we introducing energy, and do we remove any safety systems to perform that task? But there are really simple heuristic tools out there that allow us to look at an organisation as a whole and very quickly start to hone in the areas where people involved in high criticality tasks that could lead to a catastrophic outcome. And those are the areas that we want to focus on quickly, and that's where we want to start. One of the ways that we can do this is called safety critical task analysis. So safety critical task analysis is the approach of proactively looking at an organisation and drawing these three dots together. Where within the business do we create activities that could contribute to something bad happening? And that unfolds all of the kind of tools and techniques of a human factors professional. So what task is it? How do we correctly define the task? How do we correctly define the behaviour? What types of errors are we interested in? Is it a right object, wrong action, right action, wrong object? Is it a mission error? Is it a checking error? Are we asking people in the control rooms to do something called vagabonding, which is move from one system to the next and constantly be flicking from one task to the other? And what is the propensity for error in that time of task? These things are very accessible when we start to get to this level of detail, and we do that by going from big to small. Once we understand the error category and the error type, then we can start to really drive down into, well, what sort of recovery method would be put in there, and actually what type of recovery methods do we already have in place. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that lots of organisations, in fact every organisation, do have pockets of really good human factors practice. Often they're dislocated and disjointed, but if we can do a quick exercise to screen these and pull them together and give them a little bit of direction and focus, then that can make all the difference. And then of course we need to talk about performance influencing factors. So we go from big to small. We can pinpoint within an organisation where people are taking part in activities that could lead to a catastrophic failure. And then we understand what the error type is, what the behaviour is, what the category of that error is, and what existing controls and additional controls can be put in place. It's a process-driven way of managing the human contribution to risk within your organisation, and it is incredibly effective. In addition to that, we want to understand, well, how does the organisation influence the behaviours of the people that it has in its employ? Well, as I said before, Mr. Garman, Kenny, and the three boys that collided in the jets in Lossiemouth, they were all under some form of performance influencing factor. Stress, pressure, lack of situational awareness, all of these things negatively impacted their ability to perform the tasks appropriately. And so we want to talk about performance influencing factors, and we want to consider how can we, at an organisational level, improve their ability to do their job properly. I'm just going to flick through these. So we've captured the majority of them. And then how do we apply the hierarchy of controls to control those behaviours and errors that we've identified within the business? And of course, so that's a proactive approach. How do we look at an organisation and say, organisation, we're coming to get you, we want to understand where the risk lies proactively. The risk with this is that you're never 100% sure, yet that's where the risk lies. In a reactive approach, and we've been really fortunate to work with SDC with regards to integrating human factors into an instant investigation tool, and I'm really pleased to see that the uptake of that has been impressive. But we talk about human factors being this golden thread. So we talked about error types, performance influencing factors, and we talked about understanding where within the business we are most at risk from the human contribution. And there is no better way of doing that than retrospectively looking at an organisation through an instant investigation. And so we would pull this golden thread that is human factors right the way through the investigation piece, using exactly the same terminology and things that we'd use in the safety critical task analysis. So what errors are we interested in? What category of error is? What's the consequence of that error? And is there anything else that we can do in terms of identifying that error and managing it before it realises its full error path and results in an unintended consequence? And what can we do after the event? So in the aviation world, we use something called threat and error management, recognising that it's impossible to reduce human error completely. It's human error, adaptation, whatever you want to call it, is a fact of life, and we need to embrace that. And we need to recognise that to err is human. And therefore there's a multi-layered model in there that says, well, if we're going to err, we need to be able to detect that, control it, and mitigate it insanely. And so we do that by consideration of the type of error. How can we put mitigations in place? How can we catch that? How can we recover from it? And of course, our focus is on prevention, but we recognise that it's not always possible. And then we'll consider our performance influencing factors. So if you look from a proactive perspective that allows us to screen the organisation and get after the human contribution of risk in a proactive manner, and then use that as one of our bookends. And then on the other end of the process, we've got a really insightful integration of human factors with an instant investigation tool. Then we've got two bookends that allow us to look at our organisation proactively and reactively, and this kind of get them from both ends, if you like. Those will start to tie up in the middle using this golden thread analogy of human factors. Incredibly simple to do, incredibly process driven. You know, there's often I get a little bit frustrated when organisations think, well, human factors is very firmly placed in the too difficult bucket, and you know it's warm and fluffy and tree huggy. It doesn't have to be. As you can see before, we can apply numbers to things, we can apply probabilities to things. We've got processes, we've got categories, we've got taxonomies, and they are really simple to get their hands on with a little bit of process and a little bit of support. And then lastly, the big question is, well, what do you do with all of this? Well, you know, you'll get lots and lots of value that fall out of your safety critical task analysis process, and of course your instant investigation process. The cardinal sin in my mind is that all of that value sits on the shelf, and therefore a human factors integration plan, again, a simple, recognised and proven instrument for integrating human factors into an organisation in an effective and light touch manner is the way to go. So a human factors integration plan, we look at various different aspects of your operation and your organisation, and we pull in the appropriate points of human factors, your error management, your fatigue management strategy, your organisational design, your management of change assessments, your human HAZOPs, your quantitative risk assessments perhaps if you've got them, and pull them in and pop them in an integrated manner into the technical aspect of your business. Which brings me back to my first slide, that all of this work can be possible and is possible. It can be as reliable and insightful as the metrics that you would look at on the technical side of your business, as we've seen from the quantitative analysis. And it doesn't have to be a siloed or cottage industry. You can add a huge amount of value to your operation by simply making simple considerations about the human contribution proactively, reactively, in an integrative manner using your human factors integration plan. And then lastly, we've seen, I put this slide in because this concept of intelligent customer is really important to us. It's important because organisations in my opinion, need to up the ante in terms of how well they understand the discipline of human factors. And it's important to understand it for a couple of reasons. It's important to understand it so they can go and get good help if they don't have that capability in-house. And it's important to understand because once people understand the discipline, they will spot the opportunities for simple human factors integration within their operation. And we can see from the first slide, my friends that were in the Air Force and served with me, that these things can make all the difference, not just from a safety perspective, but from a organisational performance perspective as well. This looks like a bit of a sell. It's not my organisation. This is the human factors. The Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors Technical Specialist Pathway, and it's designed to do exactly what I've just said, build an intelligence customer capability within organisations at a relatively low cost, with an operational focus and a context that suits the organisation. And I think that with a proactive approach, potentially through screening and safety critical task analysis, a reactive approach through integration of human factors into your incident investigation programme, as we've done with the Comet tool in STC, and a level of organisational upskilling, just so you can answer those good questions. You can look for proper chartered support, and you can spot the opportunities within your business to say, yeah, understand there's a technical aspect to this, but actually we're probably more at risk from the non-technical aspect. Then these simple building blocks, I think, can make an enormous difference, combined with a little bit more investment than the 1%, the non-technical aspect of your business, to really start to drive the performance, the value, and the outcomes from your overall system through the effective consideration of the human contribution. And my hope is, at the end of this presentation, you think, oh, that was quite interesting, but think about your organisation, think about how you could proactively take some steps, think about some investigations that you've maybe done that don't consider the human element, and think about, as you look around your boardroom, or if you look around your peers, ask yourself, what is the level of intelligent customer within our business, and is there something that we could do there to take a proactive step to increase that? And I think if we do one or all of those things, then we will hopefully see a reduction in events of fatalities, incidents, accidents, and organisational failings that have really driven me to this point in my journey of human factors. I think that's 30 minutes. Thank you very much for your time, and I'd happily take any questions.
Thank you very much, Neil. As always, excellent and really important subject. Yes, if anyone would care to ask Neil anything about what he said, either if this is a new field to you and have sort of questions about how this can be done, because as he says on the face of it, it's treated as too hard, or there's some people in the audience here who have been doing human factors work, so it'd be interesting to sort of share your experiences on that. So yeah, the floor open to anyone. When you started out with that, Neil, you said about obviously investment is high in the sort of technical solutions to thing, and investment is low. Is that because people just assume it is too hard and don't do it, or they do realize it, but when they get into it, they find that it is too hard? So what sort of I don't know, maybe you could give us one or two examples of quite specific things that people implement to counteract human factors then. I mean, sometimes, as you say, it with a technical design, it's easy. You put in a barrier, you change the specification of something. What sort of practical things do people do to deal with human factor risk?
Yeah, brilliant. So I think the point I was trying to make is that of course there should be an investment in the technical side, and I would argue that actually without the technical elements of a system, there is no non-technical elements. There's no requirement for the human factors aspects, because without the technical piece, you don't have the user engagement. And I think that the technical aspects of a system are easier to get your hands on, because you build stuff and you gather requirements and you see things through it. It's much more tangible. But in answer to your question, how do we integrate human factors into these technical programs? Well, the quick answer to that is through screening exercises alongside the technical program. So when you gather the requirements, asking really simple questions such as how is that going to be operated? How is it going to be maintained? How many people do they need? What are the likelihoods for human failure in this type of setup? And if we ask those questions really early on, then they're infinitely easier to address and manage throughout the program. When we look at traditional, or when we look at technical engagements that we've been exposed to, a lot of the technical aspects of the project has been done, and so hardware exists, user interface exists, and then someone says, "Oh, we should probably consider human factors." And so the human factors consultants toddle along, and they're faced with something that's already built, is quite mature, and therefore all the recommendations in the world would actually make it, because the stuff is built and is there in front of you, it's very difficult to make those retrospective changes. As simple as the recommendations may be, some of them are almost impossible to integrate because it would involve backtracking around the technical design. So my point is get in early. If you can get in early and ask the simple questions, then the technical output is often far more user-friendly, and if it's more user-friendly, then we know that we've engineered the human factors into the design, and therefore the likelihood of failure types, the likelihood of maintenance errors, the likelihood of operational errors are engineered out from the get-go, and life just becomes infinitely easier moving forward. And of course the other point, Doug, is that with all these failures there's direct and indirect costs associated with them. So recovery costs, incident investigation costs, maybe costs associated with damages, etc. So if we can get in early, we can ask the simple questions and integrate them along with the technical program, whatever that may be. Building an oil rig, construction, CDM as we mentioned earlier on, building an airframe, building a new capability, modifying a piece of kit. The earlier we can get in and ask these simple user-centric questions, the better for all involved.
Yeah, and it does link back to what Nick was saying about that intervention early on, not just what he was talking about, using the data to change technical design, but being able to automatically raise the antenna of people at that design stage to, yeah, but there's a human factor to what you're doing here. Absolutely. as well as just good. So anyone else want to pick Neil's brains while we have him here, or perhaps share your own view? Yes, Chris, on you go.
I just had a very, very quick question. Neil, what is that term vagabonding you used? Where does it come from? Who uses it? That's an interesting concept.
Yeah, vagabonding. So it's one of the it's a human error type, if you like. So it involves moving from one task to another, and so quickly shifting from tasks. So time off tasks, reorientation, and new tasks. So the quick answer is I'm not sure where it came from. You see it in a lot of error taxonomies, and we know that going back to my military life, a lot of the Jaguar crashes resulted in something called a head-down display. So the pilots used to have to look down, they had to look up, to look down, and they were vagabonding between the outside environment and the inside information streams. And quite frankly, the cognition couldn't cope with that. So vagabonding, it's often it's often described as a human error. I'm a vagabonder at heart, so I like working across multiple different streams to maintain my attention. You just need to be conscious of that time off task, and it also contributes to cognitive overload. So if you've got lots of tasks and they're all taking a little bit of your capacity or the user's capacity, then it's often a stealthy way to overloading individuals or users.
Yeah, okay. It's a good visual. I like it. I'll keep that one.
Good man, thank you.
Good, thanks, Chris. Anyone else want to make a point or share some experience in this yourselves? Yes, Karen. Yes, Karen, go ahead.
Hi there. Yeah, so I have the pleasure of working with Neil, so I thought I'd better say something. But yeah, I think what you're speaking about, Neil, is about getting it as part of what we do and as part of what the organization do. And this, I think, is for us a bit of a challenge, and it's a bit of a chew, and it takes a lot of time. So I don't know if there's anybody has any, good advice on how how to do that better, but it is something I suppose we appreciate. It is just taking quite a lot of time, but the key is to make it part of what we do and not something I suppose that's done to us. I suppose is kind of around human factors, and yeah, that's a bit of the challenge we're trying to work with.
Yeah, so just to follow up on that, on Karen's point, I think we said in one of the earlier slides that when we talk about investment, we often talk about pounds, shillings, and pence, and throwing money at bringing human factors capability in. What's really important from an organisational perspective is the affordance of investment to the people to give them this chance to upskill and be part of the organisational solution to human factors. And it comes back, I guess, to my last slide. Without that organisational capability, and a growing one at that, there becomes a dependency on external organisations, and I think that's a costly way of doing things, but it also makes it difficult to maintain the continuity and sustainability within the business. And so investment doesn't necessarily need to be money orientated. Investment in exposing people to human factors and giving them the time to expand and grow into that space is really important to grow that organisational capability.
Yep. Thanks, Karen. Jason, you've got a query?
Yeah, just to reinforce that fact about, so human factors for me has been a real big push, building on top of our common process. And one thing that I've found that has had a bit of a success is something that Neil actually picked up on right at the start of his presentation, where we've seen, or we can evidence, improvements in quality, right first time, in productivity, in morale, by having the people that are involved with designing processes involved with human factors up front. So rather than relying on incidents to occur and human factors being brought in through the investigation, actually demonstrating by actually creating processes that are easier for people to follow, not as distracting, this vagabonding, jumping from one task to another. So not only trying to attack it from a safety point of view, but also reinforcing the fact that we can see productivity gains, safety gains, quality gains, just by being mindful of human factors right at the beginning of the design of a process.
Totally agree, Jason. There's this old adage that today's quality issue is tomorrow's safety issue, and I completely agree with that. And I think the other point that I think you're making there is that it doesn't have to be difficult. So little and often, all the way through the process makes up a world of difference. And to have those conversations at the start, in terms of how would the user use this, how would they approach it, how would they attach themselves to it, how would they access it. These things genuinely matter when something manifests itself on site, and you've got an operator who constantly has to go and get a set of step ladders or build a hop-up or get onto the second floor to access these things. So I think one of the really powerful secondary effects of including human factors from the get-go is that it's noticed by the people that are involved in your business. Their life becomes easier, they feel listened to, and they feel there's a little part of themselves in each and every design that has included an HF element, because it's the users that make this whole thing tick. And once it's there, and it's there for generations to really get the benefits from. So I think that's a brilliant point, Jason. Little and often, involve your users as much as you possibly can, and keep it simple and get it in early.
Yep. Great. Thanks so much for that. Okay, so we're thank you, Neil, and I don't know what great adventures you're going to get up to this weekend, but sure we'll enjoy them when it comes along. Okay, so we're now at a point in time, I think, where we're going to take